Okay, we've got some breaking news coming in now. We've got some breaking news. This is one of the biggest milestones that has been marked in the 2 months of the invasion of Ukraine so far. Breaking news coming in. Major boost to Ukraine's defense. Ukraine, we can confirm, has just received consignments of old fighter jets from a neighboring NATO country. The Pentagon has just officially announced that jets have recently been accepted by Ukraine, and that outside MiG-29 aircraft, they haven't named the kind of aircraft, but the Pentagon has just revealed that fighter jets have just been accepted by Ukraine. 2 months into the war, Ukraine has just received a consignment of outside fighter jets from a neighboring country, and these fighter jets, we hear, are basically for spares that can be stripped from these aircraft to keep Ukraine's existing MiG-29 fighter aircraft flight-worthy. Remember, as a result of the war, Ukraine's Air Force has been largely on the ground. Ukraine has been pleading for fighter jets from the outside. The West and the NATO have been dilly-dallying for many, many weeks together with no real response. And now the Pentagon has dropped a bombshell. It has just announced today that Ukraine has recently received fighter aircraft and spares. It does not specify where these are from, but we are hearing from our sources that this is a consignment likely of Slovakian MiG-29 fighters that have arrived in Ukraine by road. But just to be very clear, these are not aircraft that will simply be flown by Ukrainian pilots. These are aircraft that will be used for spares. The spares will be taken from these aircraft possibly and be used to keep Ukraine's existing MiG-29 fighters in better shape. For the 2 months of this entire conflict, remember, the Ukrainian Air Force has not been able to fly any air power missions as a result of the overwhelming use of air power by Russia. Using superior fighter jets and aircraft, Russia has been able to impose its will from the air despite losing more than 200 aircraft, both fighters and helicopters, in the last 2 months of this conflict. And now a glimmer of hope as far as Ukraine's air power response is concerned, with the Pentagon revealing that the first consignment of fighters from the outside have arrived in Ukraine. But the Ukrainian government, remember, has clarified that these are not full fighter aircraft. So don't think that these are aircraft that are going to come in and simply be flown by Ukrainian pilots. These are going to be used for spare parts to basically boost the availability and the readiness and flight-worthiness of Ukraine's existing but small fleet of MiG-29 supersonic fighter jets. We're going to get a reporter from Ukraine to give us more details on this big development that has just come in from Ukraine. The Pentagon has just confirmed that fresh fighter aircraft have arrived in Ukraine to boost the country's Air Force capabilities, the readiness and flight-worthiness of its fighter aircraft, and to be able to mount an air power response after 2 months to Russia's air power attacks that have been happening since the beginning of this conflict. Remember, through the entire conflict, has practically been begging for Western support. Ukraine has been asking for all manner of weaponry. It has pleaded with NATO not to stop the supply lines of advanced weaponry. Ukraine believes that a NATO-imposed no-fly zone would have been a game-changer, but that clearly is not something that NATO has been prepared to do. But what the Pentagon has just announced could be the biggest step. It's not the ideal step that Ukraine wants, because Ukraine wants fighter aircraft from the outside to come in and fly against Russia. But since the NATO is not prepared to do that, aircraft that will boost the availability through spares support, through parts that can be cannibalized from these aircraft for Ukraine's existing MiG-29s, is a big, big step. Let's go straight across to India today. Abhishek, Bhalla joining us live from Kyiv. Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, live with us from Moscow. Abhishek, to you first. Huge step. Right through this conflict, we've heard President Zelensky and, the Ukrainian government practically beg, for fighters and other heavy equipment to come in from the outside. The Pentagon has just said that Ukraine has just received some fighter aircraft from the outside. They've not specified where these are from, but we guess that these could be from Slovakia, because Slovakia also operates MiG-29s, which are the same aircraft type that Ukraine also operates. And Abhishek, what are you hearing? We hear this would be more by way of ensuring that the existing MiG-29 fleet in Ukraine will have badly needed spare parts, which is something that has mainly kept them on the ground during this conflict.
That's right, Shiv. In fact, the Ukrainian Air Force has come out with a statement saying that there are no new aircraft, but these are spare parts which will give a boost to their fleet, existing fleet of fighting jets. And considering the way things have been going, any help for Ukraine at this point of time is going to be of a great significance because it's very clear that this war isn't ending. The end is nowhere to be seen, and there is still a lot of fighting happening, a lot of missile strikes that are taking place in several parts across the country, places closer to the border. I'm closer to the Russian border right now, and things have been pretty hot here. In fact, there have been fresh missile strikes almost every day. So it's a big concern, and the big question is, how can Ukraine actually, give a response to all of this? Do they have the air defense systems to respond befittingly? Can they use whatever air force they have to mount pressure on the Russian side? All this is still to pan out, and in the next few days or maybe weeks, we'll know exactly where this war is headed. As of now, it's clear, Shiv, that there is no end in sight for this conflict, which is likely to continue for a very, very long time now.
And as we're going to show our viewers in just a moment, the intensity of the combat operations is actually likely to escalate in the hours and the days ahead. Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, is in Moscow, fresh off that world-exclusive scoop with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who had actually announced the second phase of operations. But Geeta, first to get you in on this breaking story with the Pentagon announcing that Ukraine has just received, fighter jets and aviation spare parts for its air force. There's been this very, very simmering debate over what kind of red lines Russia would need to identify in order to see NATO as a co-belligerent in this entire conflict. Russia has made it very clear that it is looking very closely at these weapons that are flooding into Ukraine from NATO. But they've obviously made it very clear that if any shots are fired by NATO, they will see that as an act of war. How would Russia interpret this? This is basically, practically giving the Ukrainian Air Force wings.
Well, Shiv, a very important question, because there are two lines of thought over here. One is the official line of thought that we got yesterday of not just intensification, but also the fact that the eastern Ukrainian front is something that will not be returned or will not be going back to Ukraine anytime soon. And therefore, the kind of equipments and weaponry that we're seeing coming into Ukraine. But having said that, the statement that has come from Pentagon is one where they are talking about additional aircraft but spare parts. A little too late in the day for Ukraine, because Ukraine has been asking for it for a very long time, and it's only coming now. But the other line of thought over here in Moscow is also that Russia is not just looking at NATO entering Ukraine. Russia is also looking at how NATO is enhancing capabilities of the Ukrainian forces. If the capabilities come to stand at a point where there will be massive damage to the Russian forces, then in all probability Russia is going to use all its force and might. Right now, Russia has not used its air force, the full might of its air force, Shiv. So that's another line of thought where there they're trying to differentiate whether if NATO's involvement is just entering Ukraine
Yes.
or even providing weapons and systems to Ukraine. So that's a very important distinction that will be drawn should these weapons, these aircraft really carry out severe, serious damage to Russia.
Okay, Geeta and Abhishek, thank you very much for joining me on this big breaking story that we're getting to our viewers. We'll connect with you in just a bit from now.